Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to IACAC's Lunch and Learn series. My name is Joe Freeman. I am the Director of College Counseling at Beacon Academy in Evanston, Illinois, and also co-chairing the Ad Hoc Committee on Professional Development, which is sort of the driving force behind this series. You may recall a few months ago when we surveyed our membership asking about feedback regarding professional development. Many of the topics that we are covering during this series came from that survey, and multiple responses indicated that our members would like informal space to connect with each other and to discuss some of the things we face daily as admission and counseling professionals. It is our hope that this series will do just that. A few housekeeping details, and then I will turn it over to our facilitators who will help guide our conversation this afternoon. We do ask that all participants be mindful that this is a professional space, and we ask that you keep conversations both focused on the questions under consideration and respectful of the experiences of other participants, especially as some topics, like this one, might carry significant impact with colleagues. At the end of today's event, we will be sending out a survey about your experience. That survey might be in a few days. Please take a moment to fill that out and to submit it, especially since this is our first time hosting an event of this nature, and this is our very first of the series. And if you're not yet an IACAC member, or if you need to renew your membership, we do encourage you to visit iacac.org to learn more about the benefits of membership. Enjoy your lunch and learn. Thank you so much for your participation. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our facilitators, Eric Ruiz from the University of St. Francis, and Mary Alice Berg from Loyola University Chicago. Eric?
Good afternoon, everybody. Super excited to be on. As Joe mentioned, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Eric Ruiz, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions here at the University of St. Francis. And, you know, I've been working with undocumented kids now for 11 or 12 years now, and even though you've been working with them for that long, nothing is ever the same. Things are always changing, things are always updating, things are going downhill, things are going uphill, and then that's in the United States, not to mention all the things that are changing in your own institution. If anybody's ever been to one of our previous presentations, you'll be able to see that every school handles things very differently. And what we are trying to do, we are just big advocates for our undocumented population. And we are here to try to gather as much information from each other, because sometimes we tend to say, you know, I don't know if it's going to happen in my school, or I'm just one person, things like that. But we've been able to see over the past few years, big changes happening with one person being the game changer, with multiple people being the game changer, things like that. So that's why I'm excited to be here to help facilitate the conversation, and excited to get more knowledge from you all, and share the knowledge that we have. So we have a few things to update you on, but I'm excited for the conversation. Mary, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. My name is Mary Alice Berg. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Loyola University Chicago. And Loyola was, I mean, many years ago made news because they had all the students on campus, a completely like student-run initiative, decided to donate a portion of their student activity fees to go towards a scholarship for like DACA and now Dreamer students. And so we made a lot of headlines. It was something that people were really impressed with, but the scholarship only covers one person, and there's a ton more students that are applying to Loyola, you know, on the transfer and the freshman side at any given time. So I think that's why this issue is something that I'm passionate about, is like, you know, we do really well in some ways, and then, you know, as we probably all feel about our institutions at other times, like I feel like we miss the mark at other times. So particularly working at a private school, I'm really excited to like hear what different strategies some of the schools are using to kind of work with students, dreamers, and other students that are coming through the pipeline. And then we kind of talked about this in our intro, I'm constantly reminding myself that like a student, a dreamer student doesn't always look the way I think they're going to in my head. And so I try to come into every conversation being open to what a student or a family might share with me. And even having been in this profession since 2004, there's still times where I feel my like bias in my brain start to work. And I have to say like, no, Mary Alice, this isn't what you think it is, you know, and so to come in with like a very kind of fresh set of eyes and a listening set of ears for all the interactions that I have with students and parents.
Yeah, so the way that this is going to work, most of you have your cameras off, which is totally fine. But we want to make sure that we have this conversation, and Marian and I don't want to be the ones to just present to you. There's plenty of time for presentations, but we know that many of you have many different experiences of what's happening in your institutions and things like that. So you can put some questions on in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself, if you are able to, and ask your question and things like that, and we'll be able to keep the conversation going. Depending on how the conversation goes, we might need to separate into little subgroups, but if we just continue the conversation, we'll be able to determine whether that needs to happen. So to start off the first question, Joe did put on the 2 questions on there, and wondering if anybody is willing to talk about this. I'll talk a little bit about our experiences as well, just to keep it going. But the first question was, how can we best support our undocumented students as school counselors and missions officers? And I will tell you, at St. Francis, it's been quite a journey to try to help undocumented students. When I first met my first undocumented student at St. Francis, it was just an assumption that there was just nothing that we can do for them. Since then, we have grown quite a bit with our undocumented population and trying to help them out. Actually, we've finally been able to get to the point where we have an actual undocumented scholarship for them, where we are able to give a full tuition out to an amount of a full tuition to as many students as we can. Usually that's about four to six students per year, undocumented students. We just actually went through the interview process to see if we can become a partner with the Dream.us, because we had proposed that we are going to be able to commit a certain amount of money to 10 freshman students and 10 transfer students, with their help, of course, and things like that. So with my staff, I mean, my staff has been phenomenal with wanting to learn how to help an undocumented student, so that it's not, they don't always think that they have to come to me or anything like that. Every single one of them has been trained, and they know pretty much what I know to this point, and they are able to help a family out, regardless of where they're from or what their background is. So I think it's important to have that buy-in from your staff, from the rest of the staff, and just not have it be you. That's how we used to be, and that can get pretty overwhelming. So does anybody else have something to share, how they can support, or how they support their students, either on the college side or on the high school side?
And I'd add that on the college side, you can tell us about like institutional specific things that you are doing, or just personal like counseling and interacting with students and parents, like strategies that you've used during your time working with different students.
You know, one of the things that we've come that I've learned, especially with the recent stuff with DACA going either here or not here, is that we've seen a lot of families going back to the part of like not wanting to come out, I will always remember the story of a high school where typically around 30 families would come out to a presentation, and that was specifically for undocumented families, and the last few years, really it's only been like 1 or 2 families, and you know the population, you know that there's possibility of more more undocumented families out there, and it's hard. It's hard to be able to just say, to try to get to them. So how do we get to them?
It looks like Luis N is saying some things in the chat. Do you want to unmute yourself and talk, or do you want to just do it through the chat? It's totally up to you.
I didn't want to disturb Mr. Reese.
No, please do.
But I didn't want to forget my notes either, so I just started typing them in there. But now just a few notes. Hi, I'm Luis Narvaez with the Chicago Public Schools. A lot of times we have school counselors reaching out to me or some of my colleagues with immigration related questions. And I know sometimes out of the goodness of our heart, we want to answer based on what we've heard, right? But what we heard may not necessarily be the most accurate or up-to-date information. So we're fortunate in Chicago that we have something called the Chicago Legal Protection Fund out of the mayor's office. It's managed by the National Immigrant Justice Center, NIJC. So they're my go-to people. I just send questions over to them. I'll make the connection. They have bilingual staff, at least in Spanish and English, but I know there's some other languages as well. And I let them, take care of it. They have a group of pro bono attorneys too that sometimes work in special cases. So I just send people that way for that. In terms of specifically how can we support students, I think from both the K-12 side and higher ed side, it's important to try to push for the development of institutional scholarships or institutional financial aid that can be made available. I know in CPS, we have the CPS Dream Fund Scholarship, and it was literally an idea that our scholarship manager had to start to fundraise, through the charitable branch of our district. And that way folks are able to donate at any given time. I think that any school district can create their own Dreamer Scholarship Fund, and that way be able to support scholarships for the students. And on the institutional side, please continue to advocate for more funding for these students. The third thing I mentioned there is just being mindful of mental health issues that the student or the family may be facing and how those may impede the student's full enrollment at your institution. They may not be disclosing something like that to you, but in deeper conversations that may come to be. And I see that there was a colleague putting some information on Northeastern, so I'll let her speak on that.
Yeah, before we move on to the training part, because we will call on Laura, but I just wanted to share in my presentation, what we usually try to talk about is that if somebody's ever come out to you, you have to remember that part, that instant reaction of how your face is going to look like once they come out. That is so important, because if this is the first time this family or the student has come out, they don't know what your reaction is going to be like. So that whole mental health part has something to do with all of us too, and how our reaction is. So something to be very mindful of when talking about those kind of things. But I did want to ask Laura if she can talk about her training in Northeastern. I've heard lots of great things about this training at NAIU. So Laura, why don't you talk about that?
Sure, yeah. We actually have an undocumented student resource director, Luvia Moreno, and she has done some really great things. It really started with a student organization, Undocumented, Resilient, and Organized. And so with that student group, they really pushed to have a director and to have, faculty and staff to be more aware of issues that impact undocumented students. And so the training has been going, I've been working at NEIU for about 8 years, and I believe the training's been going on for 10 or 12. But it's great, just, we get to hear from, when they're available, undocumented students, to hear about their perspective, but then also recent legislation that affects them, and then the resources on campus and in the nearby community, so that, we as faculty and staff can direct students to the right places, and then also guide them through. I work with community college transfer students quite a bit, And so I try to direct them especially to how they can get in-state tuition, since we're a public institution, and not be charged, the double rate as an out-of-state student. And then also there are undocumented student ally stickers or placards that we put on our doors, so that students will know coming in to see us that we've gone through the training and are aware of the resources.
I'll jump in and say from like a management perspective, I think it can be really easy if you have supervisees to just like forward notifications about these types of trainings on your campus, but it like means so much more if you actually take the time to go to them yourself and then say, I really benefited from this. Or if someone's at the director level saying, during your first year on our staff, everyone needs to complete this training that our institution offers, because many institutions are taking the time to put together, things like this. But it's important that it's not just like someone who works in student affairs or someone who's a faculty member, but that it's also, people in the admissions world, that can really speak to like what programs and services are available on campus for students.
Yeah, I would say that some people are probably thinking of the opposite as well, that sometimes they feel that the admissions office is only the people that know these kind of things, and you're hoping that the student affairs staff or the principal would also try to understand these kind of things. What else? What else have you guys seen as difficult, or what kind of things should we be talking about? What are we missing?
I think it might be helpful to give a quick, because there's been a lot of news about DACA lately, and I know it's just a lot to keep up with. So I, before the session started, just did a quick research report. So I'm not going to quote my sources, but feel free to do your own research after the presentation. Because when this session was invented, when we decided to offer it, when Joe and his team came up with it, I think that the session title is very hopeful, like how to work with students after the Supreme Court blocked the Trump administration's efforts to end the DACA program. What the Supreme Court did, though, that was in mid-June. They didn't say that they basically ruled to say that the way the administration right now is ending the program is not okay, but they didn't explicitly say it has to continue on or here's how to do it. So after the news came out from the Supreme Court in mid-June that, the Trump administration's efforts to block DACA or to end DACA have been blocked, people were really, really, really excited about that news, and were excited to see what was going to come next and what was going to happen. Unfortunately, what seemed to have happened is that the administration is kind of refusing to do that. Right now, there's people that are signing up to signing up for DACA status, and they're receiving just a general form letter that says, we're not processing new applications right now. For students people that currently have the status, in previous years, they would renew it temporarily for 2 years, and now they're just renewing it for just that 1 year. So there's a lot of immigrant rights supports people who are looking at, what do we do now? Like, how do we, fight this even more? Recently in Maryland, Maryland courts ruled that the administration has to accept new applications, that they're not following the rules of what the Supreme Court came out with. But in response to that, the current Homeland Security Secretary, on their website, it just says that right now they're doing a comprehensive review of the program. So it feels, and it's really frustrating from the federal level, like we are sort of back at square one. What could have been an awesome session today saying, DACA's back, here's how to apply, here's all the protections that come along with it. Like, that is not what's happening. And the optimistic people, are still fighting on, and that's really important. And then the more pessimistic people are sort of saying, I don't know if we're going to be able to make any big strides with this before the big election coming up in November, and that maybe that might be the only way to, change how this goes. So currently there isn't, like, DACA hasn't been reinstated in a here's how to actually go through the process type of way. And the kind of the legal experts right now say that a resolution is nowhere in sight, which is, you know, hard to swallow, especially if you know students going through this personally. You know, their status and what they can and can't achieve is like being given to them and taken back away. Like, I can't imagine going through that as a, you know, a child, a young adult. So that's kind of where we are in the national landscape right now.
Yeah. I want to point out what Melissa had said. She had says, I think it's important to distinguish between students with DACA status and students who are undocumented or may be ineligible for DACA. And that is very difficult, a very difficult road, because it's already hard to distinguish whether somebody is potentially undocumented, and then to go even further, whether they have DACA with that. But Melissa or Luis, you both had commented on that. Would you care to share any further on that?
I would just like to say, I think that I hear a lot of people in my world talking about undocumented and DACA students as if they are the exact same thing, and they're really not. That not all undocumented students are eligible for DACA status, and that that can be really important to understand, knowing which protections are available to DACA students and which protections aren't then available to undocumented students, and just the sheer number of students who may or may not be one of those things. And that can be, I think it's important just to keep that in mind when working with these students. I found that to be really helpful. Just to clarify, say, okay, I'm aware of both of these things may be your situation, and leave it, then hope that the student chooses to disclose so that I can help them with that process.
Yeah, great. I mean, Erica brought up the part of that as far as trying to present and being straightforward, of being able to separate those kind of things. Luis, were you going to say something?
Similarly, I was just going to say, not everyone qualified for the RISE Act in this previous circle either, particularly a lot of newcomers, who might have not been able to demonstrate state residency for 3 or more years. They were not eligible for that. So just like not everyone's eligible for DACA, not everyone's eligible for the RISE Act, and it's important to distinguish the different groups instead of trying to just encompass everyone into one group. And I know we're very knowledgeable of that here, but that point that Melissa made also reminded me about the RISE Act.
Great. Rebecca, were you going to say something? Nope. Yes. All right. So to go further with that, with what Erica was talking about in that, and it is very important that when we present, right, we don't want to just say this is an undocumented session or this is a DACA session, especially, right? Sometimes we use the term dreamer as that, but we don't always want to use dreamer, because not everybody believes that they are dreamers, right? They don't necessarily like that kind of language. So we need to be mindful as to like how we are expressing that. On our St. Francis webpage, for example, we have undocumented, DACA, and dreamer all in the title, so that they can try to identify all that. But I wanted to bring up a point of what Erica had talked about, and Joe, you asked the question, as a school counselor. So for you school counselors out there, how can I ensure that I am creating an environment of trust, care, and concern? One that might make disclosure feel safer. How do we do that?
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica. So I think just kind of, being straightforward. So me, myself, I am a DACA recipient and I am an admissions counselor. So I always start my presentations off kind of stating to students that when I was looking at college, it never felt like a possibility because I didn't know it was possible, because no one was telling me it was possible. And so now I tell them, we have the resources and we can go ahead and point you in the right direction. I am a DACA student. And then I tell them specifically about what resources Cardinal Stritch University in Wisconsin has for them and how they were able to help me, but how we also help undocumented students, so students that aren't eligible to file for DACA, and how none of this information is going to be disclosed to other agencies, because that is another fear that they have, is if I disclose that I am DACA or undocumented, will my information be shared, or will my parents' information be shared? So just always being upfront and honest about confidentiality is going to be super important for the students as well.
And I'm Joe Freeman, just from the school counselor side, you know, I think about this a lot in terms of, okay, like I know I have undocumented students in my caseload, and I also know that I don't know all of my students' statuses. And so when I'm presenting to larger groups, parents, full community, you know, what do I need to make sure that I'm doing as a counselor to message that regardless of your status and regardless of where you stand, that a post-secondary opportunity is accessible to you, and that I'm going to, and my school, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you're able to follow that pathway, recognizing that it's a much harder or more difficult pathway than the majority of students, at least in my caseload, have to face. And so, you know, I definitely have my, you know, my butterfly on the wall, and, you know, some of the other ways that we signal. But I also worry that what I'm doing is insufficient, especially because, yeah, I don't get a handout at the beginning of the year telling me the statuses of my students, nor should I. And so what can I do to make sure that when that family walks into my office, they feel like, okay, if I share this part of who I am, I'm doing that in a safe way that is going to lead to support.
I think a really great thing would be just maybe having like a half sheet or making announcements, whether it be regularly or at the beginning of your classes, and just being like, if anyone needs resources for DACA or undocumented students, or you want to talk specifically in private, you don't have to disclose anything, but just kind of having that available for students that they can take, whether it be like in one section of your classroom, that the little pieces of paper that they can pick up. It gives them that incentive of like, okay, I am going to make the first move. I want to pursue higher education, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of take that step. Or if you know of any college counselors in the area that, you know, speak Spanish or kind of have that ability to go ahead and kind of connect with your students in a different perspective, definitely having them as guests or just having their contact information readily available for students would kind of take some pressure off of you. And it takes pressure off of the student as well, of like, I don't know where the first place to look is. So you're already giving them that kind of first step.
Yeah, and the idea, just a second, Dulce, the idea would be you can do it that way. You can also do it if you have, you know, if you are first gen, if you are part of the LGBTQ community, those kind of things, if you're undocumented, and just have it be part of those things so that they don't have to think of like, wait a minute, if I just go to this one thing, does everybody know that I'm undocumented, type of thing. So you can add it into those things. Dulce?
Yeah, so picking off of you guys, my name is Dulce. I'm with Southeast Missouri State University, and I'm very much in the same boat as Erica. I'm DACA, also admission counselor for my office. But going off of that, what we're going here at Southeast is that we're doing a lot of peer-to-peer mentorship. And I've seen some high schools. I work predominantly with Chicago and Kansas City, but in Kansas City area, there's a high school in particular that what they're doing is they're bringing past graduates, alums from their high school that had similar experiences to share with those students. And it's more of an inclusive environment. So going off the high school side as a counselor, how do you get those students involved? It speaks volumes to them when they can relate to our stories. Because as Erica mentioned, I myself share my story at the beginning of all my presentations, and that speaks volume to students. And I commend that high school because they really have built that program with past alumni, keeping track of them and whoever volunteers to come back and speak and be kind of like a mentor in the high school sense really helps for those students. And what Mr. Reese said, it does speak when there's not one central area that they feel like it singles them out from the rest of the group. So it's much more better if there's like an organization there to help those students. So hopefully we can work within the colorations within that, because I see that here in my institution. We have the student organization of Latino, so that's broad. That's any student that self-identifies as Hispanic or Latino. But we've seen a lot of that, the mentor to mentor kind of sharing those experiences with each other really helps those students to be successful. And it just shares their stories with their background. So I don't know if that was helpful to you, if you're thinking of something similar to do more in the high school sense, but definitely tap into individuals like Erica and myself, because we're more than willing to meet with those students one-on-one and kind of go through their options, because everyone has their own unique situation. So it's just really kind of sharing those stories and seeing what we can do to offer them to be successful.
Let me just applaud both of you because it is great to see that we are having our that we have people in with these statuses that are becoming admissions counselors and recruiters and things like that to help those that are others. So congratulations and thank you for willing to work with that, because we know that this is not a job that will be done.
We do have a couple questions that came through the chat. And so I'm going to read it and then open it up. So if you kind of like move around, we'll, call on you or raise your hand or whatever, because we want to hear from the greater group. But Sophie is a new admission counselor. And she says, does anyone with more experience have advice for what to say / how to work with a student who didn't know they were undocumented until they started the college process? So, either high school side or college side, like, have you encountered this, and like, what were strategies that you used as you worked with that student and family?
I think everybody's talking at the same time. Everybody forgot to unmute. Mariana's coming on. Nope, she left.
Nope,
She's back.
Sorry, I'm in my baby's room, if you could see here. I'm gonna actually turn off my video right now. I'm multitasking, can't tell. Hi everyone, my name is Mariana Sanabria. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I actually have been working in the profession of admissions now 13 years. My background is actually in counseling. I had my graduate degree is in counseling. So, anytime a student discloses information or is going through what is likely a very emotional and probably a traumatic experience in front of you, the first thing that's always my go-to is to start with just one, acknowledging that what the student is sharing with you is very emotional and traumatic. They're going through a trauma, and quite possibly they're experiencing that right in front of you. And two, coming from a place of empathy, and really just first acknowledging the student, thanking the student for even disclosing any of that information with you, because it is likely very difficult to do. And two, just really kind of focusing on what are the tangibles for the student at this point in time? How can you think through some of their questions with them, perhaps even help them develop a list of questions that you or other supporters in your lives can start working through, and finding solutions. As an admissions counselor, you may or may not be completely in touch with their entire experience or what transpires for them throughout the year, especially if it turns out perhaps you may not be their first choice, but they just found out, so they're just trying to put feelers out and figure out what their options are. But just also, making sure that you are thinking about the person and what the person is going through, and checking in often on kind of, where they're at and if they've been able to find answers and how your institution can particularly support them or connect them to someone who can have those conversations with them. I think the other piece too is just asking about family members. You know, who are their supporters and who do they want to include in some of these conversations moving forward? And if you can carry on that conversation, great. If you need to pull someone in that may have more knowledge or is bilingual to support that conversation as well. You know, so just thinking through your action steps to help that student kind of start to compartmentalize what needs to happen for them.
Yeah, great points, Mariana. Joe?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that too. I mean, thinking about this from the school counselor side, you know, perhaps, you know, if a student does disclose, Sophie, as you described, you know, just learning about a status, helping them to really think about, okay, where could those supportive voices be, right? Not only within one's family, but also within one's school. So while it's certainly the student's, you know, prerogative to share whatever they want to share with their school counselor or with a school official or an outside official, just making sure that students know that there can be multiple people out there that can support them. So it doesn't, first of all, feel like it's all on you, but you're also you're guiding students to realizing that there can be multiple resources for them as they try to navigate what's going to be a really difficult process. Maybe even, you know, and again, if it's a surprise to them, they're also trying to adjust to the increased difficulty.
Yeah, the other thing to remember is that just, it may be the undocumented student that comes to you and comes out, or it could be the U.S. citizen student that came out to tell them that their parents are undocumented, which is even harder to distinguish when they want to keep those behind closed doors. Sorry, Mary, you had your hand up.
I would say too, Sophie, so this isn't something that you should learn about, like what your institution does on the job, you know, so you don't want to encounter this for the first time and then have to figure out, well, what do we do? Like what person in financial aid is the best one to work with them? So, you know, admissions training sometimes is the best, sometimes the worst, depending on the different institutions. And I personally have worked at places with great proactive training in this area and at schools that had it more lacking. But it's in your best interest as an admission counselor to go to your supervisor and say, like, I went to this training session today, you know, I know I'm going to encounter this. Who are the resources that I can connect a student to on campus? And then kind of a little bit alongside that would be, when you're working with a student, you can also recognize the fact that, as was previously stated, like sharing this information might be a traumatic thing that they might not want to do with financial aid and maybe residence life and other people on campus. So you can offer, as you connect the student to resources as an admission counselor, you know, would you prefer that I talk to financial aid, get you a contact, share what you told me, so that student doesn't have to necessarily like have that coming out conversation 5 different times with different people on your college campus. I've also had school counselors that have reached out to say like, hey, Mary Alice, we just found this out, like, what is it going to look like for this student at Loyola? And, you know, I can be very frank with that school counselor about what we could or couldn't offer. And that might narrow their college list, but that's a good thing because it allows the student to find like that best match institution. So yeah, don't wait for it to happen. Like, you know, kind of do your institutional homework now to figure out what are the resources for when I encounter this with a student later on.
Thank you, Sophie, for your questions. And just to reiterate what Mary Alice said, you know, when we've always shared with us being from so many different colleges and universities and different institutions, when it comes to undocumented students and families, we are not recruiters at that point. We're not recruiters. We are essentially just trying to help them move forward. What other things are out there? What other question? We
had another question that was from a school counselor possibly that says, I'll be working with seniors for the first time. Are there some general tips like / ways to stay organized for helping DACA students? So kind of like, how do you keep track of, the changing landscape and the different services and programs that are offered. Do we have any school counselors that have advice to share?
I mean, we can say.
Am I the only school counselor on this one? Like, I don't know. I don't have a big population. I can certainly give this a start, Jason. I mean, first, if you, and I want to go back to Luis Narvaez's point about you really, or the points made earlier about making sure we distinguish between students with DACA status, in status students, and then undocumented students, or students who are no longer can't apply for DACA at this point. And at this point, the number of students with status in the graduating classes is going to be exceedingly low. So Ed, that's just something to kind of keep in mind as we navigate sort of between DACA students who are DACA eligible but don't have DACA, and then undocumented students. But certainly if you're privy to this information, I think the general tips is whatever your own sort of note-taking system is. So if you use a program like Naviance or a Score or Maya or something that allows you to utilize groups or tags, ways that, as a counselor, you can stay organized and being like, okay, in my caseload, I know that I have, this group of students or this subgroup of students who are going to need that sort of additional support. I think trying to kind of
I almost showed a bunch of strangers my boobs.
Track in that way.
I accidentally hit the camera.
Could be helpful. Oh wait, I'm also the host. I can mute that. I also think that in addition to sort of the organizational part, making sure you or your school counseling office does have that robust list of resources, particularly around any sort of financial aid counseling. Making sure that there's good multilingual information on the RISE Act, on the process for applying for that money for those RISE grant funds in the state of Illinois. And then also, building those good relationships with our partners across the desk, so that where some of those really supportive, safe, comfortable post-secondary options are going to be, not only based on the experience of previous students, but also just based on what you learn in the course of learning about colleges and universities and the programs that they have to offer. But I want to defer to other counselors who might have a bigger caseload of students as well.
Hi, my name is Joanne. Joanne Amador-Zapata. I'm post-secondary high school counselor in the Northwest suburbs. And I guess I don't know if I have a good way, but I guess my cautionary tale to counselors or the reminder is that, anything you send via email can always be looked at. And I would caution if you make like a Google spreadsheet and label it undocumented students, that would definitely be a no-no. So the workaround that some of us do in Naviance is you use like the journal feature and you put you have your own secret codes basically. And so I see a lot of nods from people, so I'm glad that you're saying this. But yeah, I would not recommend, keeping a Google Doc or, doing a Google survey and asking this question. Is, you definitely have to find your workarounds, and that's just what we do, with us. I hope that helped.
Thank you. Yes, I do use different sorts of coding we're a SCORE school in my own tracking of that, or my own grouping.
Melissa, were you going to say something?
Yes. Hi. So I'm a college and career coach with CPS, and so just kind of like you were saying, we code it differently, like our groups. And so we have special little codes so that they can't be found out by other staff or other entities. The other thing that we do, or I like to do, is when we are first presenting any type of FAFSA information, like we'll thoroughly go through the types of statuses that students can have, because I've found that like some of my students, maybe they don't know that they're undocumented, or they have like DACA status, but they think like that's their social security number, so now they can apply for FAFSA. Like they're just very confused about the different types of like, I guess like cards or statuses out there. And so we try to do like a little bit of a thorough presentation before we even say get into FAFSA. So it's not like, oh, everyone's doing FAFSA. And that's really a big push for like CPS too. So it's a little hard. But we try to like, let's pause before we get into like talking more about the FAFSA. Let's talk about statuses first. And then from there we can determine like eligibility. So I think like sometimes there's this like myth that like everyone can do the FAFSA, and because CPS pushes it so hard, like every student in there should be doing it. And so sometimes like our other staff members or other teachers that are not so like familiar with it will be like, oh, why haven't you done your FAFSA, right? Like they're just kind of pushing it too, and it's all like with good intentions, but like we have to step in and say like, okay, let's really discuss like what it takes to be like eligible for FAFSA, because, and it's not just for like undocumented students that are ineligible, but like even for like transgendered students that might have holdups, right? So we try to go through that, and then that kind of helps students a little bit understand, or like sometimes I'll have them like, okay, if you're not sure, like ask your parents like what you have, and then we can have a conversation about that. And I've had parents with like, or conversations with students and their parents about a little bit about their status and then what their options are after. So sometimes students find out like, oh, okay, it's fine. I can do the FAFSA. And sometimes they find out, okay, I can't, but here are my other options. And I think the other thing I find too is like a lot of students who might not be undocumented, but their parents have a lot of the same concerns and a lot of the same fears that even my DACA students and undocumented students have. So we talk about that too, and how like, I think someone mentioned it before about like confidentiality, and like we're here to like help you with your post-secondary plan, whatever your goal is. And we're not trying to like sell your information or, you know, like get you in trouble. And I think sometimes that could be really hard for students and their families, thinking like, well, I have to give you financial information, or I have to like disclose my status. And they get kind of scared about that. So just reassuring them like why we're asking these questions in the first place, I think, and being very transparent about that. Like, we're talking about this because this is an avenue to get money for college. But, right, like that's not the only way you can get to college, and that's not right. Like just reassuring them of different pathways, different resources, and just really being transparent about what you're asking it and why you're asking for it.
And you can simply say that you're not the only one or the first one to go through this situation. So sometimes they feel like they're alone.
We have a bunch of things that will happen. We have
Kimberly, just so you know, Kimberly, we can't hear you too well. You're breaking out.
My internet is not very good. So, we have a service.
Kimberly, I'm sorry, you're still breaking out. We can try one more time, or if we can come back to you. Okay, I think she said we can come back. Sorry, Kimberly. There was a question that on the chat that I wanted to get to because this affects both the college side and the high school side. It's Mike's question, and that is, I'm working with a student that wants to be practical about how I advise, meaning I don't want to hear her. I don't want her to incur financial debt. So what are the arguments between the 4 years versus the 2 years, and all that? And let me just start with, and anyone can jump in, please. Let me just start with usually what I would try to do is make sure that everybody understands that one, I love the community college. We love our transfer students and things like that. But community college isn't always the answer. It depends on the student. I wish there was a straight answer. If you're undocumented, you can go this way. but there isn't, because it's going to be dependent on the institution and the student and how much funding they're actually going to get at that certain institution. It's been unfortunate sometimes where we've had some students that have been able to get quite a bit of funding, and then they decide that that they're going to go and go somewhere else because they feel like it was cheaper, but without having the conversation of what things are going to be like once they transfer to a 4-year. So as long as that conversation happens of what is it going to be like as a transfer. So my counselors, for example, when somebody says that they want to do that, that's of course no problem. We'll actually help them choose courses too at the community college. But we want to make sure that they know this is how much it would cost if they were here for 4 to 4.5 years, right? And this is how much it would cost if you were there for one semester, 1 year, a semester, a year and a half, 2 years, and then here, to be able to see what the cost is entirely and what the potential tuition rises will be and what the potential scholarships, if you have scholarships, would be. If you can plan all those things out, we've been able to help many students at least start off with a plan to start off with the community college and ending at the 4-year institution, or they've decided to start at the 4-year institution because they found out that it was actually going to be cheaper in the long run, things like that. Does anybody else have anything to share about 2-year versus 4-year?
So I'll kind of share a little bit. I think going through a student's list of ideal colleges would also be a good place to start, and being like, let's get a financial aid package for each one. We can then compare and just kind of do it that way. I know a lot of students do kind of make that determination based on financial aid, but having a conversation of what their financial aid is made up of. So scholarships, grants, loans, the differences, because sometimes it may look like one school is cheaper, but that's because of all of the loans. But then another one might be actually cheaper because there is more grants and scholarships in that financial aid package, and that's not always something a student determines right away. They just kind of see, oh, this one's $3,000, this one's $2,000, but some already include an estimation for the Parent Plus loan, and that's not always disclosed. And let's say we run into an undocumented family and the parents are undocumented, they can't file for the Parent Plus loan, so that already kind of, it can get tricky. So kind of having that student reach out, have those conversations with financial aid, understand the different types of aid will definitely help them understand the differences in the packages.
Thank you, Erica. Audrey had asked a question in regards to being on the college side. Understanding the terms to use, like Melissa was talking about earlier. What is the best practice to use when we are telling students that all students are eligible for a particular scholarship, regardless of citizenship status? Mary Alice, do you have any best practices at your school?
So for the scholarship that we have, we used to call it the DACA scholarship, and then we changed it to the Dreamer scholarship. But then literally while I was sitting here listening to you talk earlier, I wrote down, like, should it be called that in my notes? So I might not be the best person, but I do know when I'm talking just generally, like, it is okay to use that phrasing if you're just like giving a presentation and saying maybe like our initial merit awards are open to all students regardless of citizenship. Like, I think that could speak to like an international student that's in your audience, you know what I mean, as well as someone else that's like really inclusive. But when you're specifically like, our scholarship specifically is for like a former DACA, current, what we're calling Dreamer student, but maybe it needs a new name.
There's always room for changes and different things. That's definitely that's something that I learned. But you mentioned international students. So really quick, just wanted to mention, when we're talking about undocumented DACA or Dreamer students, we are not talking about international students. That is something completely different and all that. So that's something that some people coming into the field feel like they might be the same. I would always encourage the institution, if your institutions have, like, for instance, their international counselor that may work with undocumented students. So, like, for instance, my international counselor, Elizabeth Miramontes, she knows a ton about undocumented students, and she can help them out in a flash, and she can do that. But because she's our international counselor, we make it very, very clear that if she encounters one, that she would tell them, you are not an international student, you are part of this country, you are considered a domestic student. So that is, and we actually separate that, give them to a different counselor, and not have them work with the internet, because we don't want to confuse them or their families with that. Luis says, thank you, Luis. This has been great. Is there an IACAC working group around this topic following this conversation, like a Google group or something like that? Do we know of any kind of working group? I would say, Luis, that that it would be something. I mean, this is the first time we do this type of thing. So this, if we do have a working group, I mean, it's going to develop from here. Joe?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, and I love this idea of a working group or some way that we can continue to track this. I would certainly personally offer that to our organization sort of as an action step moving out of this conversation. But I also want to sort of defer to my colleagues in IAS and other committees who might be doing a lot more work than I'm personally aware of. And then there was one other question that came through anonymously that I might pose, Eric, before we wrap up, if I can.
Yeah.
Okay, and this question is, and this is something I have no information on, so I don't know if anybody else does, but if anybody's had any experience dealing with the Sallie Mae DACA loan, also known as the SMART student loan, the questioners tried to find out what type of interest rates are made available to them, but can't seem to find any information. And the questioner might also misunderstand the availability of the loan for DACA students. So does anybody have any information on the Sallie Mae DACA loan?
I personally don't. I'm throwing in the chat that I don't know the answer, but if the questioner wants to shoot me an email, I can talk to our financial aid, because I feel like that might be like the specifics of a Sallie Mae loan is more of, in my world, like a specific financial aid kind of, they would be the experts on that versus admission. But if someone else has actual advice.
We have had a couple people that have tried for a SMART loan, but the hard part is getting that the cosigner, getting a cosigner for the SMART loan, and so that's where it gets difficult, and we have to have that conversation with the family. So that's been my difficulty. I did want to point out what Rebecca from DePaul had mentioned is an additional step, and it's not an additional step; it's a needed step. That I would say, Rebecca, that when we are considering them going to the community college or anywhere else, what we ask is that if you are working with the student, there's a reason why they're wanting to work with you, that you should be able to take them to the next person and try really hard not to say, you're going to have to call, you're going to have to do this, you're going to have to go to this office, right? You got to understand that what they just went through is very, very difficult, and we need to bridge that gap. Before it gets any closer to time, I did want to share my, and I'm sure Mary Alice will too, but I wanted to share my contact information in case anybody wanted to continue the conversation or wanted to have any questions about their students that they're working with. Again, like we said earlier, just because we work at our appropriate institutions doesn't mean that we can help. Also doesn't mean that we know the answer, but we'll figure it out with you, you know.
And then for IACAC members, there's a new membership platform that's sort of like the listserv. So if there's any questions that you had that you're like, well, the insight I got here was great, but I'd like even more, you could take those questions over there, you know what I mean, and post them, and maybe more members might come out of the woodwork to answer different questions or brainstorm different ideas too.
And for non-members, membership is very reasonably priced.
I would like to put a shout out really quick before we end. If as the year goes onwards, there's going to be many more things. These topics do come up, and we do have these type of forums. If anybody has not been to the Sharing the Dream conference, that's usually held in the spring. I would highly recommend it. That's an all-day conference that is being held with many different topics for undocumented students and families. Please keep that in mind. And if you wanted to be an IACAC member, you have access to a lot of these things. So please consider. Jeanette has a quick question. Anyone have tips on how to make sure all students feel inclusive when speaking about DACA support?
Yes, hi. I'm sorry. It probably sounds a little general. This is Jeanette. And I work in recruitment at National Louis University in Chicago. And so I only ask this because I have had a couple of times students, maybe like a handful, tell me, oh, like, I feel like DACA I felt like the scholarship was only for like Latino students. I didn't know that I could identify as a DACA student. And I definitely understand why students feel like when we talk about DACA, it's only for like a specific audience per se. And so I say this because I think about a student who told me like, I'm like a DACA student, but I'm from Poland, and like I've just always felt like DACA was maybe more so for Latino students because, even myself, I'm guilty that when I have scholarship flyers, they're either in English or Spanish. It's not totally, it's not a broader flyer. It's just those two languages to keep it simple. So I guess I just want to know any tips on just vocabulary that we can use or ways in which I can make sure that I'm making sure all students who classify as DACA feel inclusive and feel like they are also part of it. I had a student tell me, it's interesting because and they were having an honest conversation with me. They're like, I see that it's a monarch butterfly, but the monarch butterfly is from Mexico, and sometimes I feel like I can't really identify. And I was like, I understand where they're coming from. And so any tips can be super helpful, especially for me. I'm happy to learn.
Well, Jeanette, it is difficult to do that as well, especially depending on the populations that you have at your institutions, right? That you would have that. But one of the things that you'd want to consider is, and this is more of like for instance, like when we came out at our institution, we made sure that not everybody on the panel was going to be Latino. And everything. We actually had an Indian student and an African student on the panel as well. So to be able to show that those kind of things, and yeah, just keeping that language. I mean, I think the Spanish thing is still okay, but knowing that if you are undocumented, what that means, if you're from whether you're from this side of the world or the other side of the world, regardless of what you look like, and things like that, this might affect you. It might not be you. It might be your parents. It might be your uncle. It might be your grandparents. And showing them that it could be that it could be everybody. So, but yeah, I would say that is very difficult to do. But Jeanette, I would love to be able to continue that conversation. Please use my email, and would love to be able to do that. We actually have a Polish person here too, and I'm interested how they feel about it, about how they feel about all this. But for time, I'm looking at Joe. Joe's giving me the eyeball and all that. But I wanted to respect everybody's time. But I'm willing to stay on if in case anybody has last minute questions. But I think I really appreciate it. Right, Mary Alice? It's been great.
It's been great. Thank you to everyone. This was our first time doing this. Thank you to Joe and Sylvia for setting it up. Come to more of these, be ready to join the conversation. I learned a lot. Thank you to everyone who shared too.
Yeah, this was fantastic. And just on behalf of the association, I mean, we're leaving this with the formation of a working group. So like Lunch and Learn turned into action, which is pretty awesome.
It is. Thank you. And Joe, are you going to share this recording?
Yes. So the recording will be shared with participants. I don't know exactly when. I want to be sort of respectful of the fact that, but probably within the next day or so. And that will be available for participants.
Awesome. Awesome.
Enjoy your afternoon, everyone.
Oh, and I'm excited, Jonathan. I love your comment that thinking about a virtual Sharing the Dream conference if we're not able to be in person. I know personally, I was excited to make the trip down to Carbondale before, in the before times, and so continue to be excited about that upcoming opportunity.
Yeah, we all the co-chairs met yesterday in the morning, and we're just discussing what's possible moving forward, right, with COVID. But we came up with the kind of like the verdict of either if it's happening in person, great. Obviously, we'll move forward how we've done things in the past. But if it's not happening in person, then we take the virtual experience to a whole other level. So we're currently working on that to make it happen. And any type of support is appreciated. Obviously, all of you have supported me in the past and encouraged me and propped me up along with the rest of the co-chairs to be able to get this going. So if anybody's interested in volunteering, we will be sending out communication in the upcoming month to set up kind of like a committee and then move forward. But yeah, it's definitely happening still. So I'm excited.
And Jonathan, just so you know, for those people that are up here in the state, I am always willing. If anybody doesn't want to take the drive, I'm willing to ask St. Francis to donate a couple of buses so that we can drive together down there. So we can then, talk on the way down. So that was the practice run, Joe. Should we try for the real one?
I was about to say, I feel like it's only going to go downhill from this one, but no, I'm excited about the whole series. I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I signed up for a few of them too.
Yeah.